Hello, college football fans. It's Allie Peak, Will Thomas. This is a peek inside SEC football. We do this every Monday morning, and this was an interesting weekend for college football. Will, did you enjoy all of the games that were on?
I definitely did. I couldn't quad box at all ever, so I was pretty sad. But still had enough football going on, enough consequential football going on to really be interesting. Obviously, it was the highest level with the best teams in each conference playing. So yeah, it was fun to watch.
We're going to go through lots of scenarios and different things, but we got to start with the SEC championship because, of course, that is what we talk about here on this channel. And in Atlanta, Georgia finally flipped the script on Alabama, and it wasn't even close. It was a beatdown that I feel like it's been bubbling up in Kirby for years. The Dogs absolutely dominated the SEC championship game 28-7. This is a 4-game losing streak to Bama that has been snapped, and I think that Kirby Smart is excited to have that monkey off his back. Do you agree?
You would think. I think it's his second win over Bama as Georgia's head coach, and just obviously getting that win in Atlanta, a place where Bama hadn't lost, and I forget what the number was.
Mhm.
But I mean, that team does not lose in Atlanta, so taking him down in the SEC title game to win another championship for him, it's a pretty big deal. And I mean, Georgia really played. I mean, that game probably exactly how Kirby Smart could have ever dreamed that he wanted to play. I mean, they held Alabama to negative rushing yards.
Which is wild.
We both outrushed Alabama on Saturday. It's crazy to think about that. And on game day in the morning, I don't know if you saw it, but he brought up every year that we're here, it feels like there's one big play on special teams that turns the entire game. They blocked that punt
Mhm.
and the game was on its head. Like Georgia just had everything go right for them.
Yep.
They were way more prepared to play. They had revenge on their mind. They just came out and executed at a way higher level on in all three phases. And that's really why you saw them win the game how they did.
Yeah, Gunnar Stockton was, I wouldn't call him flashy, but he was just good in the moments that mattered. He was 20 of 26, 156 yards, 3 touchdowns, added 39 rushing yards, and walked away with that not only the SEC championship victory, but also the SEC championship MVP honors. This was what us as Gator fans were told we were going to get for 4 years. We saw complimentary football.
Mhm.
You talked about that blocked punt that set up a short field touchdown, the first touchdown, tipped ball interception set up the second. I think that the beginning of this game just got Alabama completely out of rhythm, and defensively, this was, we've said last year and we've said going into this year that maybe this was the year that we would have Georgia be a little bit down, that this wasn't a traditional Kirby Smart team by those standards. It was still going to be a really good football team, but maybe not quite as good as some of these others. This was vintage Kirby Smart. You mentioned those -3 rushing yards. Every time Ty Simpson dropped back, he was dealing with pressure or third and forever or both. And there was points in time where I thought this was going to be a shutout. Bama didn't even get on the board until early in the fourth quarter, and I just think at that point, it was already 21-0 before they scored, and they were getting suffocated at that point.
Yeah, Alabama was averaging 404 yards of offense per game. They were at like 101 at the end of the third quarter. Like, I mean, everything that they were doing, Georgia had a counter for. You brought up the pressures. I forget what the number was, but it was some sort of absurd amount of pressures that Georgia had gotten on Ty. And it doesn't really matter how good of a passing game you have, how composed your quarterback is most of the time. If you've got Georgia's defensive linemen flying at you every single snap, it's going to be a nightmare. And we talked about that on our previous show, actually. I think all three of us brought it up, like how Georgia's pressure and their sack rate, it hasn't been good all year, but it's kind of been coming around
Yeah.
toward the end of the season. That was an entirely different pass rush unit than Bama saw the first matchup. Like Georgia just jumped them. It was not even you could if you watch the tape of both those games, you would think it was different teams.
Yeah.
But Georgia came out totally prepared. I mean, they dominated every facet of this game. Nate Frazier had 52 rushing yards. Stockton had 39. They had like a pretty balanced rushing attack. Nobody really excelled for Georgia running the ball, but it was just that steady, we're going to just run the ball for like 4 yards to carry. We might not explode, but we're just going to wear you down. They wore them down on both sides of the ball the entire game.
We talked in our preview show too about what we talked about at the very beginning of the show, just the fact that Georgia has Kirby Smart has a winning record against every team in the league except for Alabama, and they have just not been able to get over that hump. They were going into this 0-4 against Alabama in SEC title games, 1-7 overall under Kirby. We said something about like this isn't Nick Saban's Alabama, but couldn't get it done against Kalen DeBoer last year. But Nick Saban, Kalen DeBoer didn't matter. This game in this building prior to this night has always broken Alabama's way. And I saw where Kirby Smart had asked his team in this week leading up, raise your hand if you've beaten Alabama. And nobody in the room could raise their hand. And now Georgia's senior class finally has its Alabama win in Atlanta. And the Dogs are now 65-5 over the last 5 seasons. That is like rare air, right? Clemson from 2015 to 2019 had a similar record. 2014 to 2018, Bama. But Georgia is just clicking on all cylinders. And you mentioned that they came around, that their defense came around, their defensive line. Is Georgia just absolutely hitting its stride at the exact right time going into the playoffs?
It seems like they're peaking right when they have to, and that's kind of what you've seen with some of these teams who have won in the past. Now, Ohio State last year, I mean, they lost their last regular season game, but you saw them get into rhythm in the playoffs, and they played their best ball for their last 3 or 4 games, and they won the championship. So, obviously all these teams are great. If one team is hot and one team is cold, I don't care where you're ranked, and I don't care what your record is. If you're probably not going to make a big run in the playoffs. So I do think that Georgia playing their best ball right now, not only is it true, but it's also incredibly important to where I think they can make a lot of noise, obviously. But then the other side of that is they don't play for a month.
Yeah.
Like having this first round bye, I don't want to say it's a curse, but last year you saw all 4 teams with the bye lose. And now, we have Georgia playing their best ball right now. They don't play for weeks.
Mm-hmm.
So this is really going to be another test of, seriously, how good is this Kirby Smart guy at coaching a football team to where he can look at last year, say, look, we lost after the bye. We're going to come back and be better this year. We're playing our best ball right now. We can't play for weeks, but we're still going to stay focused, still focus on the process, and come out and be just as strong as we have been in the past. It'll be a big test, not just for Georgia, really, but for all 4 of those teams who have a bye.
Yeah, it is just so many interesting things will happen during that window of time. The portal will open on January 2nd. So, there'll be lots of distractions going on, no football being played. And it is, I do think maybe we have too big of a break here. We needed to, is there a way for us to move the Heisman Trophy ceremony up? Is there a way for us to just have the Heisman Trophy? I don't know. I don't know what we do. Can the Heisman Trophy ceremony be in the middle of the week? What can we do? Can it be, what can we do? My vote actually would be for it to be at the end of the season, because I think Heisman outcomes would be changed if you didn't vote until after you saw how the season completely plays out. But I digress. I've been on that train since Troy Smith won the Heisman in 2006. He would never have won that Heisman if he played that championship game before voting took place. But there's got to be a way to speed this up. Teams should be playing this weekend, this upcoming weekend. We could move this stuff along and not be middle of January by the time we're playing a championship game. But that's a discussion for another time. But this win created a really interesting scenario for Alabama that we kind of watched play out Saturday night into Sunday morning before the selection show. Created a lot of anxiety in Tuscaloosa. And a really difficult decision for the committee, which we'll talk about how all of the playoffs shook out. But that was like nightmare scenario. And then what continued to happen into Sunday night or Saturday night, nightmare scenario for this committee, because they were faced with the decision, do we put the first ever 3-loss at-large team in, or are we going to leave out a team that played in a conference championship that would have absolutely made it had they stayed home that weekend? And that is a pretty impossible scenario for them. Did they get it right?
I think that they did. And I understand the frustration if you're Notre Dame or BYU. The biggest thing that I'm seeing that I disagree with is people saying, well, BYU was punished for losing their conference championship game, but Bama wasn't. That's not even true because BYU was not in the playoff field when that game started. They
Yeah,
were number 11, but that's not in the playoff field given the
correct.
audit and everything.
Yeah,
Bama was in the field.
yeah,
So that doesn't even really make that much sense to me. And the Notre Dame thing, I I fully understand that it's very frustrating to be ranked ahead of Miami for 6 weeks and then just seeing Miami slowly walk up behind you and then all of a sudden they pass you. It is the final result is correct. The process I do think was wrong in how it was
Mhm.
showed to fans, showed Notre Dame, showed to the country. The final, product I think is right
yeah,
because in any other situation, if you have two teams who have the same record, who have played each other, you give the edge to the winner. That's just common sense. So
yeah.
the fact that that's how it what came down to that, I mean that is correct. But I do understand the frustration with how the process played out. I don't agree with crying about it, skipping out on your bowl game, and this whole holier than thou thing Notre Dame has right now, where they're apparently the class of the sport, and if things don't go their way, they're going to make a big deal of it and stay home.
Yeah, and we'll get to that when we get to that point in the brackets that we're going through. But I completely agree with everything you said. Let's talk about the bracket. We're going to start at the top. Okay, so at the top we've got Indiana at 1, Ohio State at 2, Georgia at 3, and Texas Tech at 4. If you are explaining this to the casual fan, did the committee get the buys right? Are these 4 in the right place?
They're definitely all deserve the buys. If anything, I would have put Georgia over Ohio State because of
That
their
would be
same record.
true.
Georgia won their conference. But with those four having the buys, it's definitely correct. I mean, those are by far the four most dominant teams all year. You have three conference winners and then the runner-up in Ohio State, who was the defending champs and didn't lose a game until this conference championship. So those are definitely the right four teams because they've been far and away, the class of the sport this year.
Indiana beats Ohio State head to head in the Big Ten championship. They finish undefeated. Is there any argument for Georgia that they should have been the number 1 overall seed, or was 13-0 Indiana always going to get that spot no matter what? Would Ohio State have gotten it had they beaten Indiana?
I think the winner of the Big Ten would have gotten it, yeah, because those were the only two 12-0 teams at that point, or yeah, only two 12-0 teams at that point. So I do think you just have these two undefeated teams. This is really the attack of Titans right now. Winner gets 1, loser gets 2, apparently. But yeah, I have no problem with Indiana being number 1 right now.
So Georgia, though, has an SEC title, 5 wins over ranked teams, and a dominant neutral site win over Alabama. Do you think that there's a world where Georgia fans have a right to feel disrespected at 3, or is that just the cost of that one loss back in September? They play
I
in a
think
harder
they,
conference.
I do think they should be 2.
Yeah.
And you could say that that's splitting hairs. It's really not because, if you look at like seeds 5 versus 6 or 6 versus 7 in the rest of the field, like it's way different caliber of opponent that you're playing. So when you have a field like this, being seeded just one differently can be a massive shift. So
Mhm.
obviously Kirby doesn't care. That team doesn't care. But I
Yeah.
do think if you're a Georgia fan, you have the right to be like, I'm not, why are we not number 2? We won our conference. We had the same record as Ohio State. We have played much better teams. We've beaten much better teams. We should be number 2. So the seeding, I think that could be a difference in, a big gap in, caliber of play. But I do think, Georgia they'll be fine in that building.
Texas Tech sneaks into that 4th bye as a 12-0 Big 12 champ. In your mind, how big is the gap between Tech at 4 and Oregon at 5? Like, is that razor thin, or is there a clear line between the 4 bye teams and then everybody else?
I don't want to say there's like a clear gap, but it's definitely right. If what I just said makes sense at all. Like Texas Tech defensively, at least, this is one of the best teams that
Yeah.
I've seen in a while. Their offense isn't this super flashy thing, but Texas Tech's an awesome team and they deserve that number 4 spot. People are just kind of Oregon at number 5, they've just kind of been taking care of business a little quietly.
Yeah.
They've been over there on the West Coast. All their games are late. No one's really watching them. This team's 11-1. Dante Moore at quarterback. The receivers are getting healthy. They have playmakers on defense. So the gap isn't that big, but I do think, what you're seeing, this Texas Tech story is awesome. And the best team money can buy. I thought Rodriguez had a great answer. If you're going to buy a team, why not be the best? Like
Yeah.
this Texas Tech team deserves everything that they've gotten so far. They deserve this buy, and they're definitely one of the best 4 teams in the country. So there is a gap there, but the gap between Tech and Oregon is not that big. And I do hope that we get those 2 teams against each other in round 2 because that should be an awesome game.
Let's circle back to Alabama as the first 3-loss at-large team that we've had in the playoffs. Is that about resume, like the win at Georgia, the SEC schedule, or is that about the name on the helmet?
There's a degree where it's name on the helmet. But I do also think just looking at their resume, like their resume is better than Notre Dame's. It's better than BYU's because you look at their caliber of win and the fact that it's kind of funny. I saw someone say genius move by Bama to lose this game to Georgia because now they have a win over the SEC champ on their schedule.
Dan
Um,
Vanderbilt should have.
so I do think, I mean, Bama's resume is still better than those teams that they jumped. Having that third loss and in the fashion that it was is really where you're getting the controversy. So I mean, obviously, in the playoff, brands are going to make a bit of a shift, which is it's just it's a truth that I don't necessarily love, but it's definitely out there. But I do think that with Bama's resume, the teams that they've beat, unironically, having a win over Georgia, who was able to go win the conference, like it matters, and that's one of the best wins of the year. So I do think they still deserve it.
The committee has also repeatedly said over and over again that we won't punish teams for playing in championship weekend. So, do you think that their treatment of Alabama backed that up, or did it feel like they bent the rules for the Tide?
I think it backs it up. I think it's fine. I wouldn't have been overly shocked if they put Bama at 10. Just drop him in one little spot, but leave him in the field. But overall, I have no problem with it. If they had dropped them out, anything less than like a 42-point loss, if they had dropped Bama out, I feel like would have been a major issue, and you would have seen it like change honestly now with the playoff field. So I have no problem with them keeping in. I wouldn't have been shocked if they dropped them down to 10, but I do think that how they treated Bama and everything else was consistent with that ideology.
If Alabama's jersey said something else, if it were to say BYU with the exact same profile, do you honestly believe that that team would be in the field?
No. I think that, there's definitely that sort of baseline trust in what Alabama is as a team, as a product, and as, eyes on TV to where, like, well, this team's talented, they have good wins. But I do think that if BYU had that same sort of path, it might be a little more hairy. Yeah.
So, what message then is the committee sending to coaches? Is it go schedule aggressively, go play for a conference title, and you'll be rewarded? We'll take care of you there. Or does it say, if you're a brand, you'll be fine, but everybody else needs to be really careful?
I think that if you're a brand, you'll be fine doesn't really work for this because Notre Dame just got booted.
Yeah.
And that is sort of, the brand of the sport. So it's really just, you have to schedule these good games. And if you have a bunch of good wins and you pick up that third loss in conference championship weekend, you'll be fine.
Yeah.
Because the issue with BYU, I can look at it right now. Do they have they've beaten Utah at home by a field goal.
Yeah.
That's it. And then they've lost to Texas Tech in horrible fashion twice. Like, they don't really have a great win.
Yeah.
Which is, I'm sure that's probably what you saw, really get stacked against them in the end when they dropped this conference championship game. So I think the brands obviously do matter, but Notre Dame getting left out, that does show you that brand isn't everything.
Yeah.
And that you still need to have these good wins. You still have to have a resume that beats out the other bubble teams if you want to get in.
So let's talk about that Miami Notre Dame head-to-head versus body of work, which I do want to say that there's Adam Rittenberg from ESPN is reporting that Notre Dame is going to hold a press conference Tuesday at noon, and he's got like the big eyes. So super interested to see what they have to say. But let's talk about this. For weeks, the committee had Notre Dame ranked ahead of Miami, despite the fact that the Canes won against them head-to-head. Then when it mattered, they flipped, and Miami got in at 10, and Notre Dame was the first team out. So did that feel as inconsistent to you as it felt to me?
Yeah. Yeah, it's clear at this point that those midweek ranking shows are just kind of to get people to watch ESPN for another hour every week. Like, there's clearly not a lot of substance there.
Yeah, I can get why Notre Dame fans would be upset because the flip happened at the end. I do
Mhm.
think this would have gone over better had Miami stayed ahead of them. And if asked, they could say, because we're taking head to head into account. I feel like it's such a weird thing that like we couldn't take head to head into account until they were next to each other, which it what? And the committee said that they rewatched Miami Notre Dame this week and then flipped them. I would argue that they probably never watched Miami Notre Dame and just looked at the box score and then decided when it mattered that we should watch and then were either like, ooh, or this is totally fake. They're just using that as an excuse and this was
Mhm.
all for great television. But do you think that it feels like they admitted they had it wrong the whole time and then only fixed it when the heat got turned up? Or like, what are we believing in this? I don't know. The committee makes it worse every time they open their mouths, in my
They
opinion.
do. They do. I don't really know what I believe happened. I just kind of think you just saw this. You could kind of see it week over week. Like Miami just kept creeping up, and
Yeah,
Notre Dame, just because they were already higher, they were kind of just there's a log jam there where they couldn't keep moving
yeah.
up. So you kind of saw it happening, and you're just like, are they really going to catch them? Because if they get next to each other, then that head to head will kick in. So I understand the logic of, well, they got neck and neck. Now you have to honor the head to head. These teams like Miami just kept beating nobody and moving up. Like you knew
Yeah,
who this
like,
team was 5 weeks ago.
if you're talking Miami and Duke, right, and you're looking at a 7-5 team and a 10-2 team, I can understand why you would argue that but Duke beat Miami. Let's just say
Mhm.
this is all hypothetical.
Mhm.
I can understand why you would say head to head doesn't really matter in this because Duke has 5 losses and Miami has 2. But with the same record, it shouldn't matter whether they're next to each other in the poll that, by the way, you as the committee created. It should, I feel like that should be a bigger factor all along. But like big picture question for 2025, should head to head always trump everything else when the records are similar? Or is there still room for, complete resume argument, which is what they were saying prior to this day?
There could be room in like a very unique circumstance that I'm not even sure what it would look like specifically. Um, but like even for me, like if you look at Texas and Vandy right now, Texas is 9-3, Vandy is 10-2. I would still give the nod to Vandy,
Yeah.
even though it's only a 1 game gap. Like
Yeah.
for me, head to head really only exists when the record is the exact same,
Yeah.
and that might not be a popular opinion.
Yeah.
But I do think that when the records are the same, head to head should matter. And like maybe if for whatever reason, like Notre Dame's the schedule was 1 and Miami's was 130th, however that would pan out, then maybe you can look past it. But I mean, head to head when the records are the same, like it is the ultimate indicator, right? Because then you don't have a hypothetical. Well, this team, there's no advanced analytic you look at. There's no metric that tells you who would be better because you have that result on the field.
It just feels weird to, when the records are the same, not look at the product on the field. Like, why do we play these games if you can't point to it? But one of the biggest arguments that I found amusing from Notre Dame fans was, we have 2 top 10 losses. Their losses are terrible. One of your losses is them. Like that's the same argument like when we're saying that Tennessee fell out of the top 25 so they don't get to count as a quality win, but we don't take into consideration that it was Vandy, the team who you're saying doesn't have a quality win, that knocked them out. Like there's some bad logic in here for me. But like, if you're a Notre Dame fan, what is your bigger gripe? Is it losing out to Miami on head to head in the final ranking, or is it seeing a 3-loss Alabama team in the field?
They're probably more annoyed that a 3-loss Bama team is in, but like if the roles were reversed, if Notre Dame had a conference championship to play in
Mhm.
and they were in that championship, lost, and then imagine the outrage from Notre Dame if a Bama team who sat at home then jumped them. Like they don't agree with that logic either. They're
Yeah,
just mad that it happened to them.
right.
So the
It,
bigger issue for them, I would imagine, is just the process of Miami slowly climbing and then passing them.
it feels very much like what the committee did to Florida State in 2023, which is
Mhm,
why it feels like this is all just performative more than anything
mhm.
else. Is that if the second Jordan Travis had gotten hurt, Florida State fell in these polls and they said, look, they're not the same team. Without him, we can see that. I think Florida State fans would have been able to wrap their head around that. But we had a week or two where Florida State was playing without him. One was against they beat a very bad Florida team, like very bad Florida team who started a walk-on quarterback. And Florida State barely squeaked by. Like Florida should have won that game. After that happened, they should have dropped him, but they didn't because they wanted the rankings for the ACC championship game. But that would have been the moment to say, look, we have proof. We watched this product on the field. It's not the same, so we're dropping them now. And then it wouldn't have felt so wild when Florida State fell out after they won an ACC championship game. But I just don't feel like Notre Dame has a great argument here when the head-to-head is right there. I also think the committee is morons for telling us that head-to-head doesn't matter until they're next to each other in the polls. Like nowhere is that written. And also, y'all do whatever the hell you want every week anyway. So like, come on. But let's pivot. Let's talk about Tulane and James Madison getting in, and then talk about Duke and the ACC. So 2 group of 5 champs get in as auto bids. But the ACC champ, which is 5-loss Duke, is out. Did the committee and the ACC both do this to themselves?
Yeah. Yeah, because I mean, the playoff field as it is, you're asking for something bad to happen by not specifying, the conference champions. And for the ACC, I mean, it was just a bad product all year. And it is kind of wild to where they're at now where
system.
Yeah, and it is wild that where you're at now with the ACC where you have your conference championship, the winner and the runner-up are both at home, and just this third team is just sliding there for you because they're the bigger brand, they're the more talented team.
But you did that to yourself with your 5-way tiebreaker. Miami should have been in there to begin with.
Yeah, that's the biggest fault of the ACC is that they somehow found a way to have Duke go in the tiebreaker instead of just saying, we'll go CFP ranking for the tiebreaker. That fixes this whole problem.
Right. The rule is, for who gets in, by the way, top 5 ranked conference champions. Not every Power 4 champ gets in. Do you like that? Or do you think a Power 4 champion has to be protected in a 12-team format?
I would probably say Power 4 champ should always get in. But in the case of Duke, like for every other one, I can say that the G5 teams don't stack up. For Duke, that's actually the opposite.
Yeah.
Tulane has a win over Duke this year. So
right. They are the de facto ACC champions. The ACC champions actually did get in.
Yeah. So it's a little hard to make the argument now, but I do think, broad strokes, like this is probably one of the only years this happens.
Yeah.
So I think that Power 4 champs should be guaranteed a spot in moving forward, but this whole year is just kind of, it's just a whole glob of a mess that the committee had to deal with.
I do kind of feel like had Virginia won, which is what people thought was going to happen, that there is a great chance Notre Dame would have gone and Miami would have stayed home, and we wouldn't have heard this head-to-head argument. But I also think the committee felt some pressure to not leave a Power 4 conference out completely, which also kind of lends itself to like Notre Dame could join a conference. They could have protection for some of this stuff. And I know they think that they are bigger than any one conference and they're the biggest brand in college football. And so they are safe. I find it wild that there is an MOU floating around that gives Notre Dame automatic in if they're in the top 12.
Yeah, that's the dumbest thing I've ever seen in my entire life.
Who the hell else signed that? How in the hell did Greg Sankey sit there and be like, oh, I mean, I'm okay with that. Like,
so they could go 4-8 next year, but if they start ranked at top 12, they're going to go.
It's just, I don't know. It is batshit crazy in my opinion. But from a national health standpoint, what's better? Letting Tulane and James Madison in because they actually earned it? Or should the committee have bent things to guarantee the ACC championship a spot, even when the ACC created this 8-5 champion through their own stupid tiebreakers?
I think it was right for them to not bend things this year because of how much they're already dealing with this Miami Notre Dame thing. But I think given how it's currently formatted, this was the right way to go. But the fix obviously is to just change this format because obviously this is a disaster. So for right now, I think it was the right move to go Tulane and JMU. But I'd imagine this is the last year we even have 12 teams in the field. I think we're going to 16 next year, given what's happening right now. So I think moving forward, hopefully they get it right. I don't have much confidence in that adjustment happening, but I think for right now they made the right call, but the format has to switch up.
Well, we'll circle back to expansion in a couple minutes because I want to talk about that. But if you are the ACC office today, are you more mad at the committee or are you more mad at yourself for using a tiebreaker that spit out a 5-loss champion and left a higher ranked team on the couch at home?
You've got to be mad at yourself because you still got a team in. The committee still found a way to get your team in. So you have to look in the mirror and be like, how did we get in this situation where Duke just won our conference?
Yeah.
Like that is a self-reflection moment for the ACC where they have to look at that and be like,
5-loss team. It's not even like it could be any brand, but a 5-loss team just won your conference.
yeah, that you got to look in the mirror and be like, there is something fundamentally wrong with how we're doing this because we still got a team in. We don't need to lick our wounds and be like, oh, we got left out entirely because they didn't. So now you can look at this and be like, we have got to fix this to where this never happens to us again.
So let's talk for a minute about BYU. They lost their league's title game and they missed the field. Alabama obviously lost its league title game and gets in. Is that purely a resume gap, or did the committee contradict its own, quote, we don't punish conference championship title losers line that they had floated out there?
Yeah, I think it's resume gap. I brought it up in the very beginning, but like BYU didn't get dropped out of the field when they lost that game. They were already out of it.
Yeah.
So that argument is obviously being floated around there because they were number 11 and people want to hate on Bama and the SEC. It's not true.
Yeah.
They didn't get dropped out of the field. They didn't get rewarded for losing to Texas Tech again by 20. That's what happened.
Yeah.
So if BYU had won that game, they'd be in, and rightfully so. But they lost it, and they were already on the outside of the field, so they didn't. So they didn't. Sure, they dropped a spot, but they didn't drop out of the playoff field.
Yeah.
So that argument, I don't really understand that much. So I do think it was just resume. I think it was like that Bama has good wins, BYU really doesn't, and the two times that BYU played a good team, which were both Texas Tech, they got crushed.
Yeah.
So it just did, BYU didn't seem like they really fit the criteria, didn't belong in the field this year, which obviously people will use that as, ammo against the SEC, but that's not really what I think happened.
Yeah. I do think it's funny when people are like, their only losses are to the number 4 team in the country. But why are we looking more about who you lost to than who you beat? Like, you didn't beat anybody. Your only 2 opportunities to show the world what you could do, you choked. But when you look at BYU and Notre Dame and Alabama side by side, cover up the names, just look at the profiles. Who would you have put in those last 2 at-large spots?
Bama would definitely been in there just because of their amount, and their ranked wins. What do you seen them do on the field? And then Notre Dame versus BYU would be Notre Dame, right? Because you'd have, I think, there's sort of that playing your best ball at the right time that I could buy into with Notre Dame because they have won their last 10 straight, and I'll give them credit for the win at Pitt. I'll give them, the USC win is solid. Going to Stanford sucks, but winning that game convincingly is still impressive to me. So I think Notre Dame's resume is better than BYU's to me, but Bama definitely still gets in just because of how many ranked wins they ended up stacking up.
Do you buy the committee's explanation that they're using one consistent set of criteria for everyone? Or do you think Nick Saban and others that have spoken out have a point that the group of 5 champs and blue blood independents are really being graded on 2 different scales?
Yeah, there's definitely different scales, maybe just for every team. I mean, there's zero part of me that will ever buy right now that there is a consistent grading scale that is not, swayed toward anybody at all where this is being graded out. This is a disaster of a process. We're granted, I think they actually did kind of get this more or less right, but the process as a whole still is not being run very well. We're seeing that with the ranking shows. We're seeing that with all the controversy right now. So, no, I do not believe that they have one steady grading scale for everybody.
I don't think they have the same grading scale from one week to the other either. But when I was talking about that Nick Saban comment, like his quote was, you've got 10 teams evaluated on one set of criteria and 2 teams getting in on another. Do you agree with him that having Tulane and James Madison in over Notre Dame is a fairness issue? Or do you see that as exactly how the auto bid system is supposed to work?
It's how the auto bid system is supposed to work, but I think that that system is
Not
unfair, to kinda answer both your questions at the same time, because if you were just going off a resume, Tulane and JMU don't even have a resume
yeah,
because they're beating American and Sun Belt teams. I think they're great teams. They're very good teams. They're dominating their conferences, but, Notre Dame maybe doesn't have a giant marquee win. They have 8 more wins better than those 2 teams have.
yeah,
So it's fair in the sense of where the automatic bids are working, but I think that that system is a little skewed, at least to where you have 2 G5 thing coming in, but then that's where we go back to the ACC being a mess and everything. So I definitely agree with Saban on that point to where those 2 teams are being judged with almost without looking at their resume because they just won their conference. While Notre Dame, BYU, Miami, they were being judged for all 12 games that they played.
So, how much do quotes like Saban's sway public opinion? Like, are we watching the start of some political campaign from a few big brands that are going to change the rules again? And this time it's going to be in favor of more at large spots and fewer guaranteed group of five bids?
I mean, a guy like Saban, people didn't love him when he was coach at Bama because of how much he won. And there's probably still that slight sentiment from people from non-SEC fans like this guy's an SEC guy. He definitely moves the needle.
Yeah.
So I think seeing him say something like that, and to your point, I do think that we see change going into next season because,
Yeah.
yeah, and granted, there's no format that's ever going to not have 3 or 4 fan bases pissed off that they were just left out of the cut. But I think that this has always been trending towards 16. And I think that now that you have Saban saying things like that, you have national media members saying things like that, you have a school like Notre Dame who is now like, sort of planting a flag and making a big scene about this, you'll
Yeah.
definitely see change come pretty soon, I think.
I would love to see the first change. This would be a subtle change, but to make it so that all conferences have the same set of tiebreaker rules. Because I think
Mhm.
that there's an argument to be made that it wasn't that now we do have 4 Power 4 conferences and 5 guaranteed in. So you could say, let's just change it from 4 to 5. And, if so, Tulane would still be in under that format, and so you're still getting a group of 5 team in, but you're not stuck with 2 getting in, which probably would have elevated Notre Dame into this playoff too. And maybe people would be less happy. I mean, excuse me, would be more happy. But I do also think that if everybody has the same tiebreaker rules, that levels the field a little bit too. And the ACC never would have had a scenario where their conference champion is being left out in favor of a group of 5 team. You would have probably Miami in there for that. But we're going to talk about the playoff expansion. There's already talk of jumping from either 12 to 16 or even 12 to 24. I've seen, which is kind of more in line with the FCS model. This specific year, would a 16 team or 24 team bracket have actually fixed most of our outrage with Notre Dame and BYU and Vandy, Texas, or would it have just moved the complaining further down the list?
It probably would have just moved it down.
Mhm.
And this is the issue. This is the Notre Dame thing with me. Like, they have just got to join a conference because you can't keep having these special rules for a program that has as much pull as Notre Dame does and is always going to be nationally relevant.
Yeah.
Because whether it's 12 or 16, when you go to 16, I think there's more of a conference, sort of play in tournament within your conference to get to the playoff. But then what do you do with Notre Dame? Do you just give them that guaranteed spot as long as they
Apparently
don't
we
fall
do,
under bid?
because that's what the MOU says for next year.
They have just got to go to the ACC and they can win the ACC every year. Just go do it.
Yeah.
So I do think this year it would just move it down the line because you still have these inconsistencies, with Notre Dame being independent and with, like you said, with the tiebreakers with the conferences, still being a disaster.
Well, I can remember when we had the 4 teams, that was with Florida State and they were left out. And we said, if we go to 12, this won't be an issue because who really cares who's the 13th, 14th, and 15th team? Do they really have an argument that they belong in? Going from 4 to 12 is going to fix this situation. And it didn't, because that's exactly what it does. It just bumps it further down the line. And like we said with 4, does 13, 14, or 15 really have an argument to be in? We're going to be saying that exact same thing with 17, 18, and
Yeah.
19, 25, 26, 27. I just, it doesn't make a ton of sense to me. I feel like, I don't know what you think, be honest, but Are we chasing fairness with expansion, or are we just chasing content? More games, more TV windows, more money, and we're just saying it's fairness because that's like a marketing slogan.
The fans are definitely saying that it's fairness. So
Mhm.
then all of the suits are looking at that and being like, yeah, this is about fairness. Yeah, guys. But like the motivation factor between fans versus TV and conferences, they're doing the same thing. They're doing it for different reasons. Because, like, a Texas fan, a Vandy fan, they want more spots because they think they can go win a championship this year because they think they have a playoff ready team. The TV execs are going to be like, yeah, we want 16 because I want Texas in the playoff also this year because they'll make me more money. So both teams do kind of want that same thing. I think fans are looking at it from a fairness perspective, which I do agree with. And then, the TV guys looking at it as like, yeah, you guys tell yourself whatever you want to tell yourself, but we're getting 4 more playoff games next year. So I think it goes both ways.
So if we go to 16 or 24 and we bring in auto bids for, the top 4 power league teams and 2 group of 6, and then we have more at larges, do you worry about that watering down the regular season, or is that trade-off worth it for less, I don't know, bubble chaos, which I still swear would exist?
I do think it's worth it because if you go to 16, this is at least how I think Josh Pate said this first, and this is how I now envision this happening. If you do go to 16, and let's say the SEC gets, it's like 4 bids per conference.
Mhm.
So then you have the number 1 seed, number 2 seed in the SEC. They get a bye into the playoff. That's fine. It would get rid of conference championships, which I hate. But then you'd have
Making me
seeds 3 through 6 sort of playing a play-in situation. So you'd have 3 hosting 6, 4 hosting 5, and like this year, that would be A&M hosting Oklahoma and Bama hosting Texas in campus playoff games effectively. So that I don't worry about that, de-incentivizing the regular season because then the conference races become incredibly important because then you're playing for that seeding within your conference, but you're also playing for, can we get a home game for this play-in situation? Or, can we avoid having to go play A&M? Can we play Bama instead? So I think you'd probably wouldn't see a whole lot of out of conference in that situation, which would kind of suck. But with now, 9 conference games in all these conferences, and if the SEC race is all of a sudden made the most important thing in that conference again, you'll see the sport, even though the playoff is so many teams, you'll see August to November kind of feel like it used to
Yeah.
because then the SEC race becomes the most important thing to these schools for those 3 months. I think that could kind of fix the regular season problem that people are worried about happening if the playoff expands.
Um, yeah, I mean, I guess I can kind of see a scenario like that. I push back because I feel like every year we say, well, so and so might be in, but they're not making it out of the first round, or like we
Mhm.
know, we know it's going to be between more than likely Indiana, Ohio State, Texas Tech, or Georgia at the end of the day. Like I was trying to work through who I thought was going to be in there, and I'm pretty sure it's going to be Georgia and Indiana. And like, so wait, we're going to end up with a champion that was one of our top 4 to begin with. Like, if we can legitimately look at this and say this team that's in here does not have a chance to win this, what are we doing? Then we just
Mhm.
have even more that do that. And I mean, I don't know. It just um it feels wrong. And I understand that other sports do it. I feel like it's always made college football unique that we don't. Um I love bowl season as well, and I think that it would kind of eliminate bowl season. And as somebody that's the sister of a former walk-on, like, I think that bowl games are important for your seniors. They're important
Mhm.
for your reserve guys. They're important for your walk-ons. It's a good reward for the hard work that you put in all year, kind of behind the scenes. Like, it's not about your running back getting their, eighth set of beats from the bowl as their bowl gift, but it is from for your kid who doesn't have NIL money, has been a batter, acted as a punching bag for their team for the last 11 months. And this is a good way to reward them for their time. And I do think some of that gets lost in it a little bit. But, I really think if you use the BCS system to create your 12, you did away with any auto bids, and you made all conferences have the same um, tiebreaker systems, you could come up with a much better product. I think, and funny enough, using the BCS system would have put Notre Dame in and Miami out, but at least you could point to why
Mhm.
instead of, a bunch of people who all have a vested interest in the outcome of this, by the way, sitting around in a room, not really watching the games and trying to look at social media to determine who should be in and who should be out. Like that doesn't feel, I don't know. That doesn't feel like the right process. And I'm just so worried about watering down the regular season that it scares me to make these changes.
Yeah, I think on to point about bowl season, what I'm wondering about is that now that these kids are getting paid, can they not just be obligated to play in all their team's games?
They should. They should be
Yeah.
obligated to pay all the way through. Now, interestingly, when Notre Dame opted out, we know a little bit less about some of the other teams that opted out. And I maybe feel slightly differently about a team who didn't hit 6 wins, so they thought they were done, and they dismissed their team for the semester,
Mhm.
and guys cleared out their locker because they're graduating or they're entering their portal or they're whatever else. I understand why it's a little bit harder to reverse course on that because you thought you were out. And so I kind of feel a little bit differently about that. Notre Dame, I tweeted it. They took their ball and went home because they didn't like the outcome. They could have played BYU. That would have been a great opportunity for both of those teams to say, we belonged. Look, we can show you. That's another
Mhm.
team that was on the bubble. And I think it's a missed opportunity, and I think it's a bad message to college football. I'm kind of shocked that Marcus Freeman allowed that to happen.
Yeah.
I'm really honestly disappointed in him for that. And, they say they didn't want ESPN to make money off of them. The school would have made money off the bowl too. And I think it's disrespectful to your seniors, your walk-ons, your reserves, your fans, who you would have given another time to watch you. A really good game, by the way, one of the better ones you would have played the entire year in terms of strength of schedule. You robbed everybody of that opportunity because you wanted to throw a fit. And I
Mhm.
don't know what kind of lesson you think you're teaching college football, but if anything, it's that you're a prima donna. You are soft, and you've sent that message to 120 impressionable young men that it's okay to just go home if you don't like the outcome of things. And I think the overall grand scheme message of that is terrible.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, to your point about the walk-ons, like that's who I feel for. Like there
Yeah.
are guys who are on that team who are probably seniors who are not going to go to the NFL. And because I don't know how they made the decision, maybe it was a very popular vote among the team. But like for those guys, they're
And
now
that's
done.
where a grown up in the room is like, no, stop being soft,
Yeah.
wipe your tears off, put your cleats on, and let's go show the world what they missed out on.
And like you said, for the fans, like they now no longer get to watch Jeremiah Love play football.
Mhm.
Like when I was
They didn't know
7
that
or 8 years,
was their last chance at
yeah,
the
like when I
last
was
minute.
7 or 8 years old, like the kids on Florida who like Percy Harvin idolized him. Guy like Tebow or Chris Rainey, things like that. Like if I was a kid and then all of a sudden my team opted out and I didn't get to see them play one more time, like I'd be heartbroken.
Yeah.
And that is definitely something that some Notre Dame fans are going through. So like
Yeah.
it sucks for so many reasons and for so many people who aren't the ones in that room who want to throw a $20 million fit.
Yeah. And it's, you know what? Life's tough. You didn't like the outcome you were given. It might not have been fair. I believe that Notre Dame would beat Miami on a field today. I do believe that. But when you have the same record and we've watched the head-to-head happen, I can understand why you wouldn't put Notre Dame in, even if the resume overall is better. But somebody commented same for Vandy this year. Yeah, Clark Lee, totally different attitude.
Yeah.
He goes to the media and he says, this isn't anybody's fault but ours. We had opportunities that we could have controlled that we didn't. That's the person I would want leading my kid. And I don't want to attack Marcus Freeman personally. I don't know how they came to this conclusion. And I overall really like him. He was somebody that I was hoping our school would look at as a head coach. But I'm really surprised at the decision. And it's such a woe is me attitude, which I think this generation of kids already suffers from. And it was just reinforced by the grownups in the room. And I think it's wrong. And I'd much prefer my kid go play for Clark Lee. My husband's in the other room. He just texted me and said Clark Lee tried to find a 13th game. He did. He tried to do everything he could to get in. I honestly think Vanderbilt has one of the biggest gripes of anybody. That logo is anything different than Vanderbilt at 10-2 in the SEC, and they are in. But I think he responded so much better. And, when Georgia was left out, and FSU was left out, for all of crying FSU fans did, Georgia was the team that was the very best team that was left on the outside looking in. How did they respond? beat the
Beat them by
heck
60.
out of Florida. Yeah, that was a murder that we witnessed. That's the right way to respond to this, and it's a better life lesson all around than taking your ball and going home.
Yeah, it's weak. I mean, you pretty much said it all. Like it's soft. It's not a good message, and it's not consistent with what the sport is supposed to be. It's supposed to be these college kids playing a game they love, and for most of them, that's all they're going to. This is the end of the line for them, and now you're taking that away. And like you said with Clark Lee, like I do believe that Vandy should have been in, and they probably have the biggest gripe, and they're handling this with
So much
the
better.
class that you'd expect. Notre Dame, you had your shot and you lost it. And that is true for Vandy also. They're admitting it. They're owning up to it. They were campaigning for their playoff berth the entire time. They were confident. And then once it didn't go their way, they're going to beat the hell out of Iowa in this bowl game, and they're not going to complain for a second. Because that's what a winning program and a winning culture actually looks like
Yeah.
versus what Notre Dame is doing, which is just quitting. We're going to go cry about it, and we're taking this team away from our fans.
Yeah, I do. And if this was really a player made decision, which is how Notre Dame presented it, I really think this is one of those scenarios where these 18 to 22-year-old kids, 10 years down the line, 20 years down the line, are going to be sad that they made this choice. And I think that is why it's important for the grownups in the room to be like, hey, listen, I know you're upset now and you feel cheated. Let's go do something about it instead of like, sure, I'll join your pity party too. Okay, well, let's talk about the fun TV stuff. Like we've got some interesting matchups, some interesting paths. Which path do you like better? Indiana's as the 1 seed on one side of the bracket, or Ohio State on the other side, where you could see Georgia, Ole Miss, A&M, Miami, like all of those colliding.
Yeah, Indiana's definitely got a bit more of a easier path, I think, because Bama and Oklahoma are both very good teams. That first game is going to be a war. So then they're going to get a team that's going to be really beat up, coming off a lot of games, and Indiana's just clicking, so they'll be good there. And then obviously, I think I like Georgia's path a lot because Ole Miss is a good team. Georgia's already beaten them. You can get them again. And then for Ohio State, having to play A&M is not a very fun prospect.
Yeah.
You can say people can say what they want about how A&M hasn't really played many good teams because they finally lost this one game against Texas. Like the A&M that we've seen for this whole season is still who they are. That is a really, really good team. And they're going to be playing that game in the Cotton Bowl in Texas. That's going to be a home game for A&M if A&M wins.
Yeah.
So Ohio State's path is pretty tricky. Indiana, I do think, has the easiest break, which is it's nice to see a 1 seed actually have the easiest path now because I think that wasn't really the case last year. So yeah, I do think Ohio State's got a tough draw. I like Georgia's, I like Indiana's, and Texas Tech. I said it earlier, but like Tech versus Oregon would be an awesome game, and then Tech I think really can beat anybody because of what that defense can do, how many turnovers they can force. So I'm just excited to watch Texas Tech play because of who they are and the other teams on the path. Like Ohio State's a tough one, but Indiana and Georgia I do expect to fully see in the semifinals.
Okay, so Georgia, as you mentioned, draws the quarterfinal matchup against either Ole Miss or Tulane, and Alabama has to go to Norman to play Oklahoma. That's the 9 versus 8. Which SEC team got the friendlier path? And we're going to go ahead and assume Ole Miss wins, and maybe they won't, but we've watched this game already play out this year at one point, so it would have to be a very different outcome for Tulane to have a shot in it. But is Georgia Ole Miss or Alabama Oklahoma? Which one is the tougher matchup?
I think the tougher one is the winner of Bama Oklahoma going to Indiana because like I would pick Georgia against Ole Miss. But like Ole Miss has seen Georgia, and they almost beat them in Athens. Like they, at least in that building, and probably realistically, they have what it takes to beat Georgia on a good day.
Yeah,
I don't know if Bama or Oklahoma has what it takes to beat Indiana. I just don't because Indiana looks like an absolute sledgehammer of a team. So I think that Ole Miss definitely got the better draw to potentially make a run to the semis.
Oregon sitting at 5 gets James Madison at home first, and then Texas Tech in the Orange Bowl if they advance, which we think that they should. Is this kind of good karma for last year's brutal path that they got, or is that just how the bracket shakes out sometimes?
I think it's definitely both. It shook out how it shook out, but it's definitely nice to see Oregon not have to deal with a sleeping giant that was last year's Ohio State. That 5 versus 4 game should be awesome. And that's what they'll be down in Miami. Oregon and Texas Tech playing in Miami. That makes total sense.
Right.
But yeah,
Poor,
that should be an
parents
awesome one.
traveling for that.
Yeah.
What is, if you had to pick one game that you would be the most excited for watching in the early rounds, what would it be?
In the opening rounds or later on?
Do the opening rounds first, because we'll talk about the second round later.
Opening rounds, I do think is Miami and A&M because this Bama Oklahoma game, it should be good. I don't love the rematch. Tulane, and then the other ones are obviously just group of 5 games. So Miami and A&M, I think, is going to be awesome because you get Cassius Howell and Ruben Bain both rushing the passer for their respective teams. That game, I think, is going to be awesome. It's an absolute crime that is the noon game that day, by the way. That I don't understand in the slightest, but it should be that game should be awesome.
Does Ole Miss lose a step with Pete Golding as their head coach? Would they be better off with Lane Kiffin? And how does it reflect on Lane Kiffin, the outcome of this? If Ole Miss gets trounced by Tulane or even loses just by 1 point, I guess, if they lose at all in the first round, is that somehow poorly reflective on the chaos that Lane Kiffin left? Is it reflective on how Pete Golding is going to be a head coach? Is it like, how does this affect the image of those two coaches moving forward?
If Ole Miss loses, it will be spun as, look at what Lane Kiffin did to this poor team. I don't think that is going to be the actual reality of it, but that's how it'll be spun. But I think that Ole Miss is actually in a really good spot with Golding. Some of the nuggets you're getting from interviews from Golding are absolute gold.
Yeah.
Like, this guy he's like the exact opposite of Lane personality wise. Like,
Yeah.
there's no coach speak. He's just going up to the press conference and literally just saying, "We're going to murder anybody who plays us in football." Like, it's a total attitude shift. I think Golding is a perfect fit there. I really do. So I think he's got him in a really good spot.
All right, guys, we've got lots and lots of football that'll be coming up in 2 weeks. But this weekend, we do have the Heisman. So before we get out of here, I got to know who your Heisman pick is.
Diego Pavia.
Are you
It's
going
not
with
close.
Diego?
If you're Mendoza, you don't get a Heisman moment for completing one deep ball in a game where you didn't score 14 points. You don't. It's Diego. It's the guy who's done this at Vanderbilt, who has Vandy at 10-2, who has the better stats. It's Diego Pavia.
I do think that it's kind of become an award that really does. It's the best player on one of the best teams, and I think when you look at Vanderbilt and what they have done this season, it's the best year in Vanderbilt school history. They should be in the playoffs. They got snubbed. Does it soften the blow a little bit if they get their first Heisman Trophy winner?
I think it probably does. I think it probably does.
All right. Well, let everybody know where they can find you on social media and read your work.
Yeah, I'm on Twitter at WThomasSports and then Tailgate Talk SEC on YouTube, podcast, and everywhere else.
All right. Well, I appreciate it. We will do this same time, same place next week. Enjoy the Heisman ceremony.